Today, we're going to talk about the in-class activity 7C, changes to U.S. budget priorities. Just as our personal budget priorities change over time, the federal government's priorities are also adjusted based upon the needs of the nation. In your preview assignment, you analyzed changes in education, national defense, and net interest budgets. Without looking at the spreadsheet, take a few minutes and name another government budget priority that you think has changed, either increasing or decreasing over time. Okay, so you could have thought of something like less money has spent on agriculture, more money has spent on space exploration. Space exploration went up and then down in priority. I can't tell because the increases on all the categories may be due to inflation, not changes in priority. You could have come up with several different answers for this. So objectives for this activities. You're going to understand how a line graph can model a trend over time, how hypothesis needed to be supported by evidence, and you will be able to analyze data in a spreadsheet and graphs using absolute or additive comparison and relative or multiplicative reasoning. So additive or relative. And you've heard, absolute or relative. You've heard of absolute change and relative change. So you can think every time you think of absolute, you can think additive. And every time you think of relative, you can think multiplicative. You will also be able to develop a reasonable hypothesis supported by evidence. And you're going to use spreadsheets to create a line graph and describe the pattern of the graph. Right now, I want you to examine spreadsheet 7C and 7D. It's introduced in the preview assignment 7C. The figures on the spreadsheet are in millions of dollars. And I want you to think about what number you would multiply each data value in order to show all of the decimal places. And then I want you to express the number as a power of 10. Then after that, I want you to do part B, which is in 2009, the amount budgeted to education was $79,744 million. You're going to write this number with correct number of zeros, and then think about another way to write this number. So when you think about 1 million, you think about 1 million. So when you think about million, you think of, to express the number as a power of 10, you have 6 zeros. So 10 to the power of 6 represents the word million. In other words, if I wanted to write 1 million, instead of representing it in a number or in a word form, to represent it in a number form, you would put 1. Instead of million, you would put 6 zeros. This word million would be this 6 zeros. In 2009, the amount budgeted in education was $79,744 million. Write this number with the correct number of zeros. So if you wanted to write it with the correct number of zeros, you would write 79,744 million. And again, we are going to replace the word million with 6 zeros. So it would be 79,744 million would be 6 zeros. Then it says, what is another way to write this number? If we were to read the number out, it would be 79. And if we wanted a word for this, instead of million, it would be trillion. The problem with this is 79. If we look at the 9 and we look over at the next number is a 7. So instead, I would either write 80 trillion, or I would write 79.7 trillion. Because the 7, if I wanted to round the 7, I look at the 4. And since the 4 is lower than 5, I would keep that 7 a 7. So if you rounded to the nearest trillion, it would be 80 trillion. If you rounded to the nearest tenth of a trillion, it would be 79.7. Now looking at the spreadsheet, if we consider the data for the line items, education, national defense, and net interest over the years 2000 and 2019, we're going to fill in the table of values with the appropriate budget amounts. Go ahead and fill them out and then see if you have the right answer. So if I'm looking at education, the first thing, I look at 2000, which is 53,766. And the last one is in 2001. Oh, we need 2019. In 2019 would be 136,762. But if we look at the chart carefully, it says in millions of dollars. So when you write it in the chart, it's going to be something like 53,766 million. Or you can write the 6 zeros. So in 2019, I'll represent it with zeros. And in 2000, I'll represent it with words. So in 2019, it would be 136,752 million. But instead of million, I'm going to write the zeros. If I were to write in words in 2000 to find the national defense, I would come up and look at your chart. And you see in the national defense in the chart, you see that I highlighted the wrong thing. I'm actually going to look at national defense, which is this number, 294,363. Million. And if I were to look in 2019, national defense, it will be 686,003 million. And instead of writing million, I'm going to write my 6 zeros. And then net interest, if I look at that, I'm looking at the net interest. And the net interest in that is 222,949 million. And then if I were to write it out, it would, for the net interest in 2019, it would be 375,158 million would be 6 zeros. Let's focus on the education budget. Go ahead and push pause and find A, B, and C, and come back and see how we answer these questions. The first question says, what is the absolute change in the amount of money allocated to education from 2000 to 2019? Absolute change is also called additive reasoning. So to find the absolute change, what you're going to do is you're going to take the difference in the numbers, and you're going to do the high number minus the low number, and that's going to be absolute change. So for the absolute change here from 2000 to 2019, if we look at education and budget, we see that our charts show that the education in 2000 is 53,766 million. And in 2019, it's 136,752 million. So I'm going to take the higher number, which is 2019, minus the lower number, which is 2000. So I'm going to go here, and the number in 2019 would be 136,752 million. And I'm going to subtract 53,766 million. To get 82,986 million. Let me write that in a different color. 82,986 million. Now we're going to calculate the relative change in the amount allocated to the education between 2000 and 2019. We call that relative change is calculated by taking the difference between the new and older amounts and then dividing by the older amount. The answer is then converted into a percentage, and relative change is also called multiplicative reasoning. So if we take it and we take the amount in um, 2019 minus the amount in 2000 and divide the amount by the amount in 2000 times 100. So we found this amount here when we found the absolute change here. So I'm going to use this number, and it's going to be 82,986 million. And I'm going to divide it by the 1 in 2000, which is 53,766 million. Then I'm going to times it by 100 to make it into a percentage. And it comes out to 100, and it comes out to 154.3, which is 154%. So what that means to us is that between the years of 2000 and 2019, we are spending 150% more on our budget than and it's allocated to education than it was before. It says, what is your hypothesis about the federal government's priority for education? Use your calculations and your graph to support your hypothesis. So what we're going to say then is the education budget increased dramatically overall, or more than doubled from 2000 to 2019. However, as you can see from the graph, most of this change was due to the sharp rise in the early 2000s, and the budget for education was jumped up and down since then. So let's use our chart that we developed in part 3 to make that hypothesis. If we go back to the chart and we look at the education of training, employment, and social services, we notice that in 2000, we spent about 53,766 million. And in 2019, we spent 136,752 million. So it was almost 1.5 times the amount that were spent in 2019. If we write that in a contextual sentence, we can say the government spent about 1.5 times more money, or 154%. 100% would be double the amount of money, and 54 would be half that also. So 1.5 times more money on education in 2019 than they did in 2000. So they deem it more important, right? Now choose either national defense or net interest for the 2000 to 19 period. Perform the same analysis you did on question 4. Write a brief paragraph about your chosen category to be read in the morning news show. Refer to your calculations and/or your graph. Go ahead and pause the video so that you can do these calculations for yourself. I want you to find the relative change and the absolute change, and then compare them for each. So if you found that the national defense had an absolute change, you would subtract 2019 budget from the 2000 budget, and you would get 686,003 million minus 294,363 billion. So the absolute change between the 2 years would be $391,600 million. The relative change would be the absolute change over the original year you were discussing, which was 2000 budget times 100. So your relative change for this would be 133%. So a sample news report would say something to the extent of the budget for national defense has more than doubled since 2000. The national defense budget increased over 100%, but then make sure you include about 133% from 2000 to 2019. If you were talking about the net interest, you would take the absolute change, which is still 2019 budget minus the 2000 budget, and you would get $152,209 million difference. The relative change would be that absolute change over the original budget, which was 2000 times 100. If you do those calculations, you would have gotten about 68%. The sample news report would say something like, the interest government debt has increased by over $150 billion from 2000 to 2019. The net interest is increasing by about 68% from 2000 to 2019. Okay, this completes the lesson for 7C. Go ahead and do your homework as your instructor has instructed.